Hello, everyone. I'm the sleep storyteller, and I am here to help you. Today, I know you're using this video to fall asleep. So, take a deep breath and let the worries of the day fade away. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. It truly helps. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now get cozy. Close your eyes and let's begin your journey to deep relaxation. The mountains loomed vast and ancient beneath the silver glow of the moon, their jagged peaks whispering secrets carried by the wind. Shadows stretched long across the rugged landscape, where time itself seemed to move slower, held captive by the weight of history. In the heart of these formidable lands, nestled between towering cliffs and hidden valleys, stood the strongholds of the orcs. These bastions of stone and iron were more than mere shelters. They were the unyielding heart of a people who had known neither comfort nor ease, only the relentless demand of survival. Fires flickered in the depths of their fortresses, casting an amber glow upon the towering walls, reflecting off weapons forged in determination. The clang of hammer upon steel rang through the cold night air, a rhythmic song that had never known an end, the very heartbeat of a race shaped by hardship. They were the pariah folk, the exiled, the unwanted. The world of Tamriel had never carved a place for them in its great cities, nor welcomed them into its golden halls. Yet, despite being cast aside, the orcs endured, bound by an unspoken law as immovable as the mountains themselves. Strength ruled above all. The chieftain, the mightiest of them, held power unquestioned, his rule forged in combat, his word as unbreakable as the steel they crafted. Every son knew his fate, to one day challenge his father, to fight and prove himself worthy. For only through the test of battle could leadership pass. To fail meant exile, a fate worse than death. For an orc without a stronghold was an ember without a flame. Their ways seemed harsh to outsiders, their customs brutal, but to the orcs, this was the only truth that had ever mattered. To be strong, one must struggle. To be worthy, one must endure. And so they lived, carving out their existence in lands untouched by mercy, standing against a world that had tried, time and again, to break them. Their history was not written in the delicate script of scholars, nor sung in the lavish halls of kings. It was forged in the ringing of anvils, in the weight of a warhammer against an enemy's skull, in the unwavering defiance of a people who refused to be erased. Before the empire of men rose to power, before the great towers of the elves gleamed in golden splendor, the orcs had already carved their place in the world. But their origins were shrouded in betrayal and pain, whispered in legends that had long since become truth. Once, it was said, they were kin to the high elves, their forms unmarred, their fate untainted. They followed a god of might and honor, Trinamech, the great warrior who stood against the dark forces that sought to corrupt the world. But gods, like men, could fall. The Daedric Prince Bothiah, the deceiver, whispered lies and wove fate with unseen hands. Some say he consumed Trinimac whole, his divine essence twisted beyond recognition. Others claim he was cast into the void, his cries of rage reshaping him into something new, something monstrous. From this ruin, a new god rose, Malakath, the god of the Forsaken, the patron of the cast out. And with their god, his people too were transformed, no longer elves, but something darker, something hardened by suffering. They became the Orcs, marked forever by the fate of their god, bound to his exile, cursed to walk the world as outcasts. No kingdom welcomed them. No race called them kin. They wandered from the cold peaks of Skyrim to the jagged cliffs of Hrothgar, seeking a place to call their own. Again and again they built, and again, their dreams were reduced to ruin. For the other races of Tamriel saw them as nothing more than beasts, a scourge upon the land, undeserving of a kingdom of their own. And so, the Orcs did what they had always done. They endured. They sharpened their axes, tempered their steel, and held fast to the only thing that could never be taken from them, their unyielding spirit. In the shadows of the mountains, within the towering walls of their fortresses, the Orcs built their own way of life. The stronghold was their sanctuary, a bastion against the world that despised them. Every warrior, every smith, every hunter played their part. Their code, the code of Malakath, was absolute: strength above all, loyalty to kin, vengeance for betrayal. Honor was not spoken of idly. It was carved into the bone, etched into every strike of a blade, sealed in the blood of those who dared defy it. Yet even as they lived by the code, their hearts longed for something greater. Orsinium. The name alone was enough to set fire to the soul of an orc. A homeland, a city where no orc would need to bow, where their banners could fly unchallenged. It had been built before, only to be razed to the ground by those who feared what the orcs might become. The Bretons, the Redguards, even the empire of men had conspired to see it burn, and burn it did, time and again. Yet no matter how many times its walls fell, the dream of Orsinium refused to die. And so, as the winds howled through the strongholds, as warriors sharpened their axes beneath the starlit sky, the dream burned on. For the Orcs were not a people who knew defeat. They were not creatures of despair. They were warriors, builders, survivors of a world that had sought to erase them. And as long as Malakath watched over them, as long as their forges burned and their blades remained sharp, they would endure. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, let their story settle within you like embers in a long burning fire. Hear the echoes of ancient hammers striking anvils. Feel the chill of the mountain air. Listen to the tale of a people who would never be broken. The wind carried the scent of burning embers and iron, sweeping through the narrow mountain passes and curling through the strongholds like an unseen specter. Within these towering walls of stone, life moved with the rhythm of survival. The clang of hammer against steel rang through the cold night air, unrelenting, the song of a people who had never known peace, only the relentless forging of strength. Orcish smiths, their faces streaked with soot, worked tirelessly beneath the watchful gaze of Malakath, shaping swords, axes, and armor that would one day be wielded in battle. To forge was a sacred act, second only to war, for it was through steel that their legacy endured, passed from one warrior to the next, unbroken. Among the pariah folk, the stronghold was everything. It was their home, their shield, their law. Beyond its walls, the world viewed them as beasts, creatures of rage and destruction. But within, there was order, brutal, unyielding, yet fair in its own way. Strength was the only measure of worth. The chieftain ruled with an iron grip, his authority absolute, but it was not inherited like the weak bloodlines of men. No crown adorned his head, no counsel whispered in his ear. His right to rule was won through battle. His leadership maintained only as long as he could crush those who sought to take it from him. If a son desired to take his father's place, he would not wait for inheritance. He would take up his blade, challenge his own blood, and either rise as the new leader or fall into the dust. His failure, a lesson to all who witnessed it. It was a way of life that seemed cruel to those outside the strongholds, but to the orcs, it was the only truth that mattered. The weak did not belong. To survive, one must fight. To fight, one must suffer. And so they endured, shaped by the hardships that had defined their people for generations. But survival was not their only desire. The fire of ambition burned within their hearts, tempered by the dream of Orsinium. The name itself was a prayer, a vow, an unbroken promise. For centuries, the orcs had sought to carve out a homeland, a place where they would not be called savages, where their forges could burn freely, and their warriors could march beneath a banner that was truly their own. They had built it before, stone by stone, their hands calloused by the weight of their labor, their spirits lifted by the hope of what could be. And yet, the world did not suffer the rise of an orcish kingdom. Orsinium had been shattered beneath the might of jealous enemies, the Bretons, the Redguards, even the Empire itself, which had turned a blind eye as its walls crumbled. The armies had come with fire and steel, laying waste to what the orcs had built, scattering them to the winds like ash from a dying flame. But even in ruin, the dream did not die. For no matter how many times Orsinium fell, the orcs would rebuild it. In the strongholds, warriors whispered of the day it would rise again. Around the fires, elders spoke of the old city, of its towering gates, its halls filled with the sound of battle hymns and ringing forges. Younglings, raised on these tailies, trained harder, swung their axes with greater determination, knowing that one day they too would fight for a home that had never truly been theirs, but had always belonged to them in spirit. Beyond the mountains, some orcs sought their own paths, venturing into lands where their kind was not welcome. They became mercenaries, their strength bought with gold, their loyalty bound only by the weight of coin. In the great cities of men, they stood as bodyguards, gladiators, weapons wielded by those who would never see them as equals. They fought in the arenas of Cyrodiil, their names whispered in awe by those who watched them cut down foes with brutal efficiency. But no matter how many victories they won, no matter how much gold they earned, they remained what they had always been: outcasts. The Bretons, with their noble courts and whispered schemes, called them brutes. The Nords, proud of their own warrior heritage, saw them as little more than beasts. The Imperials, architects of empire and conquest, viewed them as weapons to be wielded in times of war, then discarded when the battle was won. The Orcs knew this. They had always known it. And so, though they walked the lands of men, though they fought in their wars and forged their weapons, their hearts remained with Orsinium, with the strongholds, with the dream of a place where they would no longer be pariah folk. For all their suffering, they did not break. They did not weep for what had been taken from them. They sharpened their axes. They reforged their blades. They prepared for the day when they would rise again. Orsinium was not just a city. It was a testament to their endurance, to their defiance, to the fire that could never be extinguished. And so, beneath the starlit sky, as the forges burned low, and the warriors of the strongholds rested their weary heads upon cold stone, the embers of their story smoldered on. The world may have cast them aside, may have sought to erase them from history, but the Orcs endured. They had always endured. And as long as Malakath watched over them, as long as steel could be forged and battle could be fought, they would never truly be defeated. Tonight, as the wind howls through the mountain passes, let their tale guide you into sleep. Let the strength of their will settle within you, steady as the mountains, fierce as the fire that never dies. The night stretched deep over the jagged peaks of the Rithgarian mountains, where the strongholds of the Orcs stood like unyielding sentinels against the passage of time. Within their fortified walls, torches flickered and fires smoldered, illuminating the faces of warriors who had never known a life beyond hardship. Each scar upon their skin was a testament to battles fought, each calloused hand a reminder of steel shaped and blood spilled. Here, among the pariah folk, there were no soft words of comfort, no idle dreams of peace. Theirs was a world carved from the bones of struggle, where only the strong survived and the weak were cast aside. The chieftain sat at the head of the long hall, his presence undeniable, his power earned in blood. His warriors gathered around him, sharing a meal of roasted venison and black bread, drinking deep from horns of fermented mead. But even in these moments of rest, their hands never strayed far from the hilts of their weapons, for an orc's life was never truly at ease. They spoke in low, rumbling voices of the world beyond the strongholds, the shifting tides of human empires, the endless skirmishes with the Bretons, the whispers of orcs who had ventured far and wide in search of fortune and glory. Some spoke of those who had abandoned their mountain homes to fight as mercenaries in the wars of men, offering their strength to the highest bidder. In the battlefields of Cyrodiil, their axes had carved through imperial ranks. Their shields had withstood the charge of Nord berserkers, and their names had been etched into the bloody histories of foreign lands. But no matter how many victories they claimed, no matter how much gold they earned, they remained what they had always been, outsiders. No human kingdom would ever offer them a throne. No noble house would ever accept their blood. They were tools of war, nothing more. And so, even as they fought for others, their hearts remained with the dream of Orsinium. Others spoke of the smiths who had left the strongholds, carrying their craft into the cities of men. Their hands, skilled in the sacred art of forging, shaped blades for the greatest warriors of Tamriel. Kings and generals wielded orc-forged weapons, trusting their unmatched strength in battle. Yet, despite the value placed upon their craft, the smiths themselves were never honored, never given a seat at the tables of the rulers they armed. They were respected, yes, but never accepted. To the Bretons, to the Imperials, to the Redguards, an orc was still an orc, something lesser, something other. And then there were those who had carved their names into legend, rising above even the greatest warriors of men. Champions of the arena, warlords of distant lands, exiles who had built their own fiefdoms in places where no kingdom held sway. Yet even they, despite their power and glory, remained pariah folk. The world had been built upon their backs, shaped by their steel, yet it refused to grant them a place within it. The fire crackled, casting shifting shadows upon the stone walls, and an elder warrior, his tusks yellowed with age, spoke words that settled heavily over those gathered. No matter how far we wander, no matter how many battles we win, we will always be outcasts in their eyes. His voice was rough, like rock worn by the wind. But Orsinium will be ours. And when it rises again, let them see us not as beasts, but as the unbreakable. A murmur of agreement rumbled through the hall, low and steady like distant thunder. It was an oath, unspoken but understood. Orsinium was not just a city, not just stone and walls and gates. It was hope, it was vengeance. It was the answer to centuries of exile. The world had torn it down before, had crushed its walls beneath the boots of soldiers, had scattered its people like dust upon the wind. But each time, the dream had been reborn, carried in the hearts of warriors who refused to kneel. The Bretons feared it. The Redguards despised it. Even the Empire, with all its claims of unity and law, had turned its back when Orsinium burned. But what the world failed to understand was that the orcs were not like the kingdoms of men. Their strength did not lie in walls or treaties or royal bloodlines. Their strength lay in their will, in their defiance, in the unrelenting fire that burned within them. Empires crumbled, kings fell, cities were reduced to ruin, but the orcs endured. And so, as the warriors of the stronghold sat beneath the flickering torchlight, their hands resting upon the weapons that had carved their place in the world, they did not speak of if Orsinium would rise again. They spoke of when, outside, the mountain winds howled, carrying the scent of iron and snow, whispering through the valleys and passes that had cradled the pariah folk for generations. They had been cast aside, scorned, hunted, but never broken. And as long as there was an orc left to swing a hammer, to raise an axe, to dream of a home where they were not outcasts, Orsinium would never truly die. Tonight, as you close your eyes and drift into sleep, let the echoes of the forge hum in your thoughts. Let the strength of the pariah folk settle within you, steady as the mountains, unyielding as the steel they wield. For the world may try to forget them, may try to erase their legacy, but the orcs do not fear the dark. They have lived within it for centuries, and in that darkness, they have found their light. The cold mountain air whispered through the stronghold, carrying the scent of burning charcoal and damp stone. Within the fortified walls, life followed a rhythm as steady as the beating of a war drum. The young sharpened their skills with wooden swords, their movements watched by elders whose scars told stories of battles long past. Smiths toiled over molten metal, forging blades destined to cut down enemies, yet unseen. Hunters prepared for the morning's trek into the wild, their bows strung, their knives honed, their eyes hardened by the knowledge that survival was never guaranteed. Beyond the strongholds, the world moved on, kingdoms rising and falling in the endless struggle for power. But to the orcs, none of it mattered. They did not scheme like the Bretons, nor seek glory in politics like the Imperials. They did not dream of golden towers like the elves, nor claim divine rule as the Nords so often did. Their existence was not one of conquest, but of endurance. They were a people who had been cast out of history, yet had refused to vanish into it. No matter how many times they were struck down, they rose again, fiercer and stronger, carrying the fire of their ancestors in their blood. The chieftain sat by the great hearth, his massive frame outlined by the flickering flames. His armor, dented and worn, told of countless battles, each mark a story, each scar upon his body a lesson. He watched as his warriors gathered, their eyes filled with the quiet determination that had kept their people alive for generations. "We are not like them," he said, his voice low and steady. "The men of the Empire build their cities with words, with treaties, with laws written on parchment. The elves claim their bloodlines make them superior, as if a name alone can make a warrior. But we are born of struggle. We are shaped in fire. And fire does not bend, it consumes." A murmur of agreement rippled through the gathered warriors. Each of them had known hardship. They had lost homes, families, entire strongholds to the armies of men, and Myr who sought to erase them. But they had never begged for mercy. They had never bowed. Even in exile, they had fought, not for power, not for riches, but for the right to exist. Orsinium had once been their answer to the world's scorn. A city of their own, a kingdom forged by their hands, where an orc could walk without fear, where their banners could fly without shame. And yet, time and again, it had been torn down. The Bretons, fearing the rise of a warrior race on their borders, had led the first assault. The Redguards had followed, their blades cutting through stone and flesh alike. Even the Empire, which claimed to bring order and unity to Tamriel, had abandoned the orcs when they needed them most, letting their dream burn to ash. But fire, once ignited, cannot be so easily extinguished. A young warrior, barely past his trials, spoke up. "We will rebuild it, stronger than before. We have learned from our mistakes." His voice was filled with the certainty of youth, but there was truth in his words. The elder warriors nodded, for they too knew that the next Orsinium would not fall so easily. The mistakes of the past would not be repeated. The city would not rely on the mercy of emperors or the treaties of men. It would be built in defiance of the world, its walls thick, its gates unbreakable, its warriors ready to carve its place into history with steel and fire. Outside the stronghold, the wind howled through the mountain passes, carrying with it the scent of distant storms. The night stretched on, the sky a vast expanse of darkness speckled with stars. The world may not have granted the orcs a place within it, but they would take one for themselves. Tomorrow the warriors would train again. The hunters would set out before dawn. The smiths would stoke their forges anew. And the dream of Orsinium would burn on, as it always had, as it always would. Tonight, as sleep takes you, let the embers of their spirit settle within you. Let the echoes of their hammers shape your dreams. For though the world may see them as outcasts, as beasts, as savages unworthy of a home, the orcs know the truth. They are not forgotten. They are not defeated. They are the unbroken, the unyielding, the pariah folk. And as long as there is an orc left to dream, Orsinium will never truly fall. The night was deep. The sky, a vast canvas of cold starlight stretching endlessly over the jagged peaks of the mountains. A harsh wind curled through the stronghold, slipping through cracks in stone walls, rustling the banners that bore the mark of Malakath. The fire at the heart of the great hall burned low, but its embers still glowed, casting flickering shadows upon the gathered warriors. Their voices had long since fallen to quiet murmurs, their bellies full from the evening meal, yet none had left the warmth of the flames. For tonight, they spoke not of war, not of blood or vengeance, but of the dream that refused to die, Orsinium. It had been built before. They had seen it rise, its walls strong, its towers reaching toward the sky like the peaks of the mountains themselves. And they had seen it fall, its stones torn from their places, its streets turned to ruin beneath the boots of invading armies. The Breton kings had called it an abomination, an insult to their lands. The Redguards had burned it, their warriors marching over the corpses of orcish defenders. Even the Empire, with all its grand claims of justice and order, had turned its back on Orsinium, allowing it to be crushed beneath the weight of betrayal. Yet here, in the strongholds, the dream endured. The orcs did not mourn what had been lost. They sharpened their axes, reforged their blades, and swore that when the city rose again, it would not be taken so easily. Men build kingdoms with ink and paper, an elder warrior said, his deep voice carrying across the hall. We build ours with steel and blood, and steel does not lie. Murmur of agreement passed through the warriors. To outsiders, their ways seemed brutal, primitive, but the truth was far simpler. Strength ruled, not deception. An orc's worth was proven through battle, through toil, through sacrifice. There were no lords who inherited their rule through birthright alone. no rulers who sat upon thrones softened by luxury. The chieftain was the strongest, and if ever he was not, then he would be replaced. It was the way of Malakath, the law that had shaped them since the fall of Trinimac. Beyond the stronghold walls, the world moved forward without them. The Bretons bickered in their courts, plotting schemes in whispers behind velvet curtains. The Nords clashed in battle, raising their war cries in drunken revelry, ever hungry for their next conquest. The Imperials sought dominion over all, weaving alliances as easily as they broke them. But the Orcs, they endured, as they always had, as they always would. Some of their kin had left the strongholds, carving out lives in the lands of men. Mercenaries who fought not for honor, but for gold. Gladiators who spilled blood in the arenas of Cyrodiil, their names cheered by those who would never see them as equals. Smiths who forged weapons for kings and warlords, their skill unmatched, yet their hands forever unwelcomed at the tables of nobility. No matter how far they traveled, how many battles they won, they remained what they had always been, outcasts. But not forever. A younger warrior leaned forward, his knuckles white against the wooden table. Orsinium will rise again. The words were simple, but they carried weight. They carried truth. The elder warriors said nothing at first. They had seen it all before. They had watched Orsinium be built. They had fought for its survival, and they had bled when it fell. But still, they nodded. For even if the city had been torn down 100 times, the fire of the Orcs had never been extinguished. The world will come for us again, another warrior said. They always do. The chieftain let out a low chuckle, deep and rumbling. Then we will let them come, and this time we will not fall. Silence followed, heavy and thick, broken only by the distant howling of the wind beyond the stronghold walls. Orsinium was not just a city. It was a promise, a defiance against a world that had cast them aside. It was proof that the Orcs were not simply beasts to be hunted, not tools to be used and discarded by foreign kings. It was the answer to exile, the end of wandering, the home they had fought for and lost too many times before. And when it was rebuilt, it would not be a city of stone waiting to be torn down. It would be a fortress, a kingdom that could not be broken. The fire crackled, sending a shower of sparks into the air, and the warriors knew that their time would come. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not in their lifetimes, but one day Orsinium would rise again. Tonight, as you close your eyes, let the embers of their spirit burn within you. Let the fire of their will steady your breath, the strength of their defiance settle in your thoughts. The world may try to forget them, may try to erase them from history, but the Orcs are not so easily lost. As long as there is steel to be forged, as long as there are warriors willing to fight, their legacy will endure. The cold of the mountain night settled deep into the stone walls of the stronghold, but the fires within burned bright. Smoke curled lazily toward the open ceiling, carrying with it the scent of iron and embers, the unmistakable perfume of the Orcish way of life. Beyond the thick walls, the wilderness stretched vast and untamed. The jagged cliffs and dark forests, serving as both shield and cage. Few outsiders dared to venture into these lands, and those who did rarely returned. This was not a place for the soft or the untested. This was a world where only the strong survived, where hardship was not a burden, but a way of life. Inside the great hall, warriors sat in quiet contemplation, sharpening their blades, oiling their armor, preparing for battles both seen and unseen. Every orc knew their place. The hunters would rise before the dawn, their bows slung over their shoulders, their knives strapped to their belts. The blacksmiths would wake to the heat of the forge, their hammers ringing against anvils before the sun even touched the peaks. The warriors, those who lived for the clash of steel, for the thrill of battle, would train, testing their strength against one another, ensuring that when war came, they would be ready. The stronghold was more than a home. It was the last bastion of a people who had been cast aside, exiled from history, denied their rightful place in the world. And yet, even in exile, the orcs endured. Their kind had wandered the lands of Tamriel for generations, carving out their own fates in a world that did not want them. Some had become mercenaries, offering their strength to the highest bidder. Others had become smiths, forging weapons for kings who would never share a table with them. A few had risen to great renown, their names spoken in the halls of foreign rulers, champions of battle, leaders of warbands, legends carved into the very stone of Tamriel. But no matter how far they traveled, no matter how many battles they won, they remained what they had always been, pariah folk. Yet still they dreamed. Orsinium. The name alone was enough to stir the blood, to ignite a fire that no exile could extinguish. It had been built before. It had fallen before. But that did not matter. What mattered was that it would rise again, stronger, unbreakable. A kingdom not of scholars or merchants, but of warriors, of smiths, of those who refused to kneel. A young warrior, his tusks still small, spoke from the shadows. If Orsinium rises, the world will come for it again. The chieftain's gaze did not waver. Let them come. There was no fear in his voice, no doubt. The orcs had been fighting for their survival for centuries. They had no illusions that the world would suddenly welcome them with open arms. The Bretons, the Redguards, the Empire, they would see Orsinium as a threat, as they always had. Armies would march. Sieges would come. The walls would shake beneath the weight of war. But this time, the city would not fall so easily. We have learned, the chieftain continued. We trusted men once. We thought alliances could protect us. We thought honor would be returned with honor. He spat into the fire, the flames hissing at his contempt. No more. The warriors around him nodded. They had seen too many betrayals, too many empty promises. Orsinium would not rise because of treaties or goodwill. It would rise because the orcs would make it rise, because they would carve it from the mountains themselves, because they would defend it with their own blood. The stronghold fell silent as the fire crackled. sending a shower of sparks into the cold air. Outside, the wind howled through the passes, carrying with it the ghosts of fallen orcs, the echoes of battles lost, the memories of a city that had been built and destroyed too many times to count. But the dream was not dead. It had never been dead, for as long as there was an orc left to swing a hammer, to raise an axe, to speak the name Orsinium, the dream would live on. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, let the fire of there will warm your thoughts. Let the strength of the pariah folk settle within you, steady as the mountains, fierce as the embers that never truly fade. For the world may try to erase them, but the orcs do not break. They endure, and one day they will rise. The wind howled through the mountain passes, its icy fingers curling through the stronghold like a living thing, whispering secrets of wars long past. Within the stone walls, the fires burned low, but steady, their embers casting a dull glow upon the hardened faces of warriors deep in thought. Some sat in silence, hands resting on the hilts of their weapons, their minds lingering on battles fought and those yet to come. Others sharpened their axes, the slow, methodical scraping of steel against stone, the only sound in the stillness. Here in the heart of the stronghold, there was no place for weakness, no room for uncertainty. An orc's life was forged in hardship, their purpose carved into their very bones. They were not like men who built their kingdoms with ink and false promises. They were not like elves who clung to the past, believing themselves above the struggles of the world. No, the orcs lived by a different truth, a truth bound in iron and blood. Strength was all that mattered. The weak had no place among them. The chieftain stood before the great fire, his massive arms crossed over his chest, his expression unreadable. He had ruled for years, his position secured not by birthright, but by the weight of his own strength. He had earned his place with the swing of an axe, the crushing of his enemies, the unwavering resolve that had carried him through countless battles. But even he knew that his time would come. One day, another warrior would rise to challenge him. One day, his blood would stain the stones of the stronghold, and a new chieftain would take his place. Such was the way of Malakath. Such was the way of the orcs. But for now, he ruled. And with every breath he took, he dreamed of Orsinium. He turned his gaze to the warriors before him, their faces illuminated by the flickering light. "The world will never give us what we are owed," he said, his voice low but filled with undeniable force. "We have built, and they have torn it down. We have fought, and they have cast us aside. But we are not defeated. We are not broken." A murmur of agreement rippled through the hall. Every orc in the stronghold had heard the stories, had lived them in one way or another. They knew of the betrayals, the wars, the countless times their people had been cast into exile. And yet, they endured. They always endured. "We are not men," the chieftain continued. "We do not beg. We do not kneel. We take what is ours, and we hold it with steel." A warrior, younger than most, but battle-hardened all the same, stepped forward. Then, We take Orsinium back." The chieftain studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. "We will," he said, "and this time they will not take it from us." The flames crackled, sending a spray of sparks into the air. The stronghold was silent, but the silence was not empty. It was filled with the weight of a promise, the certainty of a people who had been cast down, but had never stayed there. Orsinium was not just a city. It was the soul of their people. A dream carried through generations, whispered in battle cries, reforged with every sword they made, every wound they suffered. The world may have tried to erase them, but the orcs did not fade. They did not break. They endured. And soon, the world would remember their strength. Tonight, as the mountain winds carry the echoes of their oath through the valleys, let their story settle within you. Let the fire of their will steady your breath, the weight of their defiance anchor your thoughts. The pariah folk do not seek rest, but you may find yours within the echoes of their unyielding spirit. The final embers of the stronghold's great fire smoldered, their glow casting long shadows against the stone walls. Outside, the wind roared through the mountain passes, carrying with it the distant cry of wolves and the whisper of coming storms. The orcs sat in silence, their hands resting on the hilts of their weapons, their thoughts lingering on the battles yet to come. They had spent their lives preparing for war, not because they desired it, but because they had never been given another choice. To be orc was to fight. It was to carve existence from a world that sought to deny them. It was to build, knowing that others would tear it down. It was to suffer, yet never surrender. The pariah folk had been cast out, called monsters, treated as nothing more than beasts of war. And yet, in exile, they had thrived. In hardship, they had grown stronger. The chieftain rose from his place by the fire, his massive frame outlined against the flickering glow. He looked over his warriors, seeing in them the same fire that had burned within their ancestors, the same unyielding strength that had carried them through centuries of exile. "Orsinium is more than stone," he said, his voice steady as the mountain beneath them. "It is more than walls, more than gates, more than towers that can be torn down. Orsinium is us. It lives in our blood, in our steel, in our will." The warriors listened, their eyes reflecting the flickering light. They knew these words to be true. The city had been destroyed more times than they could count, but it had never truly been lost. So long as an orc still walked the land, Orsinium endured. "We do not wait for the world to grant us a place," the chieftain continued. "We take it, we forge it, and when the time comes, we will defend it with everything we are." A younger warrior, his tusks still small, but his heart already hardened by the truth of their people, spoke. "They will come for us again." The chieftain nodded, "and we will be ready." Silence fell over the hall, heavy with the weight of an unspoken oath. No orc here needed to be told what lay ahead. They had all seen the ruins of their past, walked through the ashes of their fallen city, carried the wounds of battles fought against enemies who had never given them peace. But now, as the fire burned low, as the wind howled beyond the walls, as the stars hung distant and cold over the mountain peaks, the orcs did not think of what they had lost. They thought only of what they would build. Orsinium had been broken, but it would rise again, and this time the world would not take it from them. Tonight, as sleep claims you, let the echoes of their story linger in your thoughts. Feel the weight of their struggle, the fire of their will, the unyielding spirit that has carried them through exile and ruin. The pariah folk do not seek rest, but in their tale, perhaps, you may find your own. The mountains remain, the forge still burns, and the orcs endure.